Some students tell me English punctuation is boring. Teach me English grammar or English speaking instead. The trouble is, if you don't learn it, you won't know the difference between these sentences. And that could mean you say something that you don't mean. So you have to learn it. To help you, I have made a really interesting guide to English punctuation. You're going to learn everything you need to know in this video, and it's going to be interesting and fun. Starting with this sentence, the panda eats, shoots, and leaves. Now, do we mean what the panda eats, one activity, or do we mean a list of activities? The panda eats, and then he shoots, perhaps a football, and then leaves the area. How do we know the difference? Well, it's all to do with the commas. In the first example, the panda eats, comma, shoots, and leaves, we have three independent activities. First of all, the panda eats, then the panda shoots the football, and then the panda leaves the area. In the second example, there's no comma between eats and shoots. Here we only have one activity, eats. What does he eat? Shoots and leaves. And this is the first rule that you need to know to get punctuation right, and it's to do with commas. In groups, use a comma when you list items in a group. That's when the items are similar in value. When you have three activities listed together or three nouns listed together, put a comma between each one to show that you're listing similar items. If you don't put that comma in, then the reader won't know. So let's get practical. Firstly, separate each item with a comma. Then, before the final noun, or if it's a verb, the final verb, write and. But be aware of something else as well, because you might be thinking, I've seen this done in different ways. And you're not wrong, because the comma before the final and is encouraged by some, but not all style guides. Even if you're comparing Harvard University and Oxford University, you're going to get a different answer. My recommendation is don't use it. Let's continue with the examples of the panda. After eating, the panda played football. Hang on a minute here. Do we mean after eating the panda, or simply after eating, and then the panda goes on to something else? To make this clear, again, we need to have proper use of commas. The second example is correct. After eating, comma, the panda played football. That makes it clear that the panda played football after a particular activity. So the next rule with commas is with introductory words or phrases. Most style guides will tell you that any words which come before the sentence subject can be separated from the main sentence with a comma. And that's what we did in the second example. After eating, that's the introductory words or phrases, the adverbial phrase, and then the actual sentence subject was the panda. So put a comma between them. A few publishers leave this out, but I recommend don't copy them. If you think back to the example I've just shown you, you can see how it could be confusing if you don't use the comma. People could have read this and thought that someone is eating the panda, which is not what they meant at all. Let's move on to another situation with animals. Look at the animals on the left. Both the monkey and the dog have food, but the animals on the right are sleeping. So which of these two sentences is correct? Feed the animals who are hungry, or feed the animals, comma, who are hungry? Well, the answer is they're both actually correct, but they mean something different because of the comma. The first one, feed the animals who are hungry with no comma, only refers to the animals who you can see are eating here. Here we're talking about hungry animals. Not all of the animals, just some of them, the ones that are hungry. The sentence at the bottom, feed the animals, comma, who are hungry, in this case, We are assuming that all of the animals are hungry. The second one refers to all the animals. We're just saying more about all the animals. They're all hungry. But the first example at the top without the comma, we're not talking about all the animals. And the comma makes all the difference here. So here is the rule. With extra information clauses, sometimes extra information changes the noun and sometimes it does not. So the first example we had, feed the animals who are hungry, with no comma. Here we mean only some of the animals, just the ones you can see want food. The second one, feed the animals, comma, who are hungry. Here we mean all the animals. The comma shows the information is just extra. It's not changing the animals itself. So when the information does not change the noun, surround it with commas. If it's in the middle of the sentence, comma before, comma after. If it's at the end of the sentence, comma before, full stop at the end. Let's go back to the sleeping cat. Which one is correct here? The cat was sleeping because it wasn't hungry. Because it wasn't hungry, the cat was sleeping. The answer is that they are both correct, and it's because of the order of the clauses. In the second example, there is a comma, but in the first example, there is not. Why? It's because of the order of the dependent clause and the independent clause. When a dependent clause comes before an independent clause, separate the clauses with a comma. Let's go back and check. So the dependent clause is because it wasn't hungry. You could not say that as a sentence on its own. It has to exist with the second part. Otherwise, it makes no sense. The dependent clause comes first, comma, then the independent clause. Now, there are some exceptions here. If the dependent clause is a non-restrictive clause or introduces a non-restrictive clause afterwards, then you still use the comma. And if you're using a contrastive subordinator and it comes after the independent clause, then you still use the comma there. So, for example, in the example here, if I said the cat was sleeping although it was daytime, I would put a comma before although it was daytime. Even though the dependent clause, although, came at the end, I'll still use the comma to emphasize the fact that there is a contrast between the two parts. Let's look at one more rule with commas. Call me Anna. What do we mean when we say call me Anna? Do we mean phone me, or do we mean Anna is my name? For example, you're meeting someone for the first time and you're telling them the name that you should use. Again, it depends on whether you use a comma or not. In the top example with no comma, call me Anna. That means Anna is my name. We have an instruction and then we have the noun that relates to the instruction. But in the second one, the comma separates the instruction from the person you are speaking to. Call me. Who? You call me. Anna needs to call me. And this is to do with the vocative. When we use vocatives, separate the person that something is being addressed towards from the information with a comma. Because if you don't, it may mean something else. Only if you separate with a comma is it clear to the reader or the listener. Remember, a comma can be indicated by a short pause when you're speaking. It's only clear that you are actually using the vocative by separating the information from the person. Let's leave commas behind. And now we're looking at a lady who has an interest in pandas. So she goes to somewhere like China and she spots them in the wild. And when she's reporting back, she says this: I had a great day. I saw pandas in the wild. Perfect. Well, if you're speaking, it's perfect, but if you're trying to write more formally, this is completely wrong. And this is a mistake I see over and over again, particularly in academic writing and professional writing. The correct version is actually this. I had a great day, full stop. I saw pandas in the wild. Now, just to be absolutely clear, the top example has a comma between the two clauses, and the second, the bottom example, has a full stop, or Americans call it a period, between the two examples. Now, why can't we use a comma? Well, here we have two independent clauses, one after the other. You cannot simply add independent clause, then independent clause, then independent clause with commas, unless you've got one of the reasons I explained in the earlier parts of this video to use a comma. The second one is correct, as I said, with the full stop, because we use a full stop to end most sentences without questions or exclamations. You have to apply one of the other rules that I've explained in this video in order to not use the full stop. Well, except in this case. I'm going to change the comma now for a semicolon. And now, that's also correct. So sometimes we can use a semicolon instead of a full stop. Now, why is that? Well, we can use semicolons to link two sentences with a similar meaning or a logical link. So let's go back. There's clearly a logical link here. I had a great day. I saw pandas in the wild. The second clause tells us why the first clause was true. So there's a logical link. If there was no logical link, for example, I had a great day, there were birds in the sky, a plane was flying overhead, and the birds had nothing to do with the great day, you're going on to another subject altogether, then the semicolon would not make sense here, because there needs to be some sort of logical link between the two sentences, an intention that one will follow the other naturally to use that semicolon. Remember, only use semicolons to link sentences which are independent. In other words, they can exist on their own. If you have a main clause and subordinate clause, or I've mentioned earlier in the video, dependent clause, independent clause, don't use a semicolon for those. Now, if you're being informal, it's more and more common now that people use dashes. For example, if you're writing an email to someone and it's someone you know and you want to be quick, the dash can replace that semicolon. What about this though? Here we have two dots, and that's called a colon. Look at this example here. I saw lots of animals today, pandas, lions, and elephants. There are some situations where we can use a colon instead of a full stop or a semicolon like this, because this is a correct use of a colon. So when can we use colons? Well, if you introduce a list, sometimes you can use a semicolon. To do that, you have to have a complete sentence before, like what we see here. I saw lots of animals today. That's a complete sentence. And then you simply add the list afterwards, pandas, lions, and elephants. On its own, it's outside of that complete sentence. If the sentence was not grammatically complete, then you wouldn't use the colon. So colons can introduce a list, or if you're about to introduce a series of bullet points, you can use a colon before at the end of the final sentence. If you're introducing a direct quotation, sometimes you can use a colon, but I'm going to come back to that and say more about that in a minute. So keep watching, because there's more to say about that. We don't always, but sometimes we do. Or if you're going to introduce an example. But the key thing is here, the sentence before a colon must always be a full clause, which can be independent, and it must include a verb, therefore. Okay, let's carry on. Now we're going to look at these direct quotations. The lady has had a great day, and now she wants to tell her friend all about what she saw in the wild. She said this. She said, I saw pandas, lions, and elephants today. Notice we've used these two upside down commas before part of the sentence and two upside down commas at the end. And these are called quotation marks, sometimes called parentheses. And these indicate that you are quoting exact speech. This is exactly what she said. I saw pandas, lions, and elephants today. That's exactly what she said to her friend. Why did we use a comma after she said, though? Well, let's go through a few rules for this. If you mention the reporter and use a reporting verb, use a comma to separate the clause from the quotation. So look at the example here. She said, comma, I have seen a panda. So we have our quotation, but we have the reporter, the person who said the information, which is she, and we have a reporting verb, said. She said, comma, I have seen a panda. Now this changes in this situation. She was very clear with her words, colon. I have seen a panda. Why do we use the colon here? It's with a sentence leading up to a quotation. So the sentence is complete. She was very clear with her words. Complete sentence. The quotation comes afterwards. Here, use the two dots, the colon. Looking back at the words in red above, she said, I have seen a panda. Well, she said is not complete. The sentence is only complete if we include the quotation. So that's the difference. Use the comma with the first one and use the colon with the second. But there's another category again. If the quotation actually completes the grammar of the sentence, don't use a comma or colon. She said she had seen a panda. No comma. So what's the difference between she said she had seen a panda and she said, I have seen a panda? Well, the difference is, in the first example, I have seen a panda, this is a complete sentence on its own. She said, and then the information afterwards could be a complete sentence. I have seen a panda. But in the last bottom example, she said she had seen a panda. Well, seen a panda is not a sentence on its own. It only works grammatically if it's incorporated into the whole sentence and the bit that came before. She said she had seen a panda, but only seen a panda is the bit which we've actually quoted from her. And in this example, we don't use the comma or the colon. Let's finish off by looking at question marks and punctuation marks. Question marks are like what we see at the end of the two sentences in the middle here. Did you see a panda? Question mark. Where did you see it? Question mark. Use a question mark to end a sentence. We could call it an interrogative, but let me explain. A sentence that starts with a question word or auxiliary. That's almost always the case. There are a few exceptions, but almost always the case that when we start with a question word or auxiliary, that indicates we are going to be asking a question, and we need to use the interrogative form, which means we have a question mark at the end. So, did you see a panda? Did is an auxiliary. And where did you see it? That's a question word beginning WH. However, sentences that act as questions but that do not begin with question words or auxiliaries should not end with a question mark. So the example below, I want to know if you saw a panda. Effectively, it's a question. The if part indicates you don't know and you're expecting the other person to give you the answer. So it acts like a question, but it's sentence formation. I want to know if you saw a panda. No auxiliary, no question word. Don't put the question mark here. And then with exclamation marks, I can't believe I saw a panda today. Use an exclamation mark to show surprise or humour or very high significance. This probably indicates surprise. I can't believe it. I'm so surprised that I saw a panda today. But be aware, this is rarely used in formal writing. Avoid it altogether probably unless you're quoting someone. So, lots to learn about punctuation marks and so much more to learn about English. And I've got so much more help for you in my course, Perfect English Grammar. Over 40 hours of teaching from me like this, with lessons, rules explained, quizzes to practice, and also live speaking practice. As part of this course, you can get instant speaking practice with the AI robot that I have trained to use the language that you need in order to have a proper conversation, practicing all of the thousands of rules that I explain on the course. There's a link in the video description if you want to find out more.